even like men, and I would pick Robert Redford $1 million. Are you kidding me? Yes.
Drive the highway down the moon, past the billboard where you see me, see me, see me, see me.
Welcome to the Silver Nitrate Witches Movie Review Brew. We are here to explore the way we review movies. From experienced critics to posts from casual viewers, we want to talk about how we talk about movies, how that's changed over time, what directions we see it going in, and more. We are your Silver Nitrate Witches. I'm Isabelle Lang. I'm a writer, editor, and tarot reader.
And I'm Laura Valenza. I'm co-film editor at the Brooklyn Rail. And today I'm a chip witch.
A chip witch?
I'm feeling sweet for now.
Oh, like chocolate chips.
Like the ice cream sandwich.
Oh, is that what they're called?
Yeah, chip witch.
That makes so much more sense than what I was thinking.
Oh.
Which is just like a sandwich, like 2 slices of bread with potato chips inside.
No, but you know what's really good between 2 potato chips? A piece of salami.
Oh, God. All right.
And so speaking of salty goodness...
Okay.
Our movie today is called Salt of the Earth. It was made in 1954. It was written by Michael J. Wilson, directed by Michael Bieberman. One of the producers was Paul Jericho, who is a member of the Hollywood 10, and we'll get into that shortly. It starred Rosaura Revueltas, an award-winning Mexican actress, and Juan Chacon.
Hey Laura, this is your future self speaking who actually did her homework. It's actually not pronounced Chacon. Juan Chacon is the name.
Who was not actually a professional actor, and we'll get into that in a minute. It was produced by Mine Mill, which is the nickname for the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers, and they were actually expelled from the Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO, which is like a federation of American unions, because of, quote, alleged communist leadership and influence. According to the labor scholar, whose name is hang on, whose name I will edit into this later, and Independent Productions Corporation, which was a production studio formed by a group of blacklisted artists, which included Jericho. So this film follows Esperanza, who is played by Revueltas, and her husband Ramon, who is played by Chacon. They're a couple who live in Silver City, New Mexico, where they live on company land and work for, or the husband Ramon works for the zinc mine. And the town is actually, it was filmed in Silver City, New Mexico. The town in the movie is called,
the town is called
Zinc Town, though it used to be called, I think she says it used to be called San Marcos, and then they changed it to Zinc Town.
After it was purchased by the Delaware Zinc
Yes,
Company.
and so I love, there's a lot of imagery about the way in which the company just owns these people's lives and tries to incorporate, like literally incorporate their identities. And so this is a largely Mexican community. And I do want to be clear though, like everybody in this film is American, but we're in a part of New Mexico that used to be part of Mexico until the United States took it over because of imperialism. So it's largely a Spanish-speaking community of Mexican heritage, and there's a lot of tensions between the treatment of white miners versus the treatment of the Mexican miners. And there's also differences in the living situations. So the company owns all these people's houses. So like the white miners have indoor plumbing, for example, and, Esperanza and Ramon do not. And so Ramon and his fellow miners decide to go on strike. They want fair wages. They want safer working conditions. And the women keep trying to push them to also ask for sanitation needs and better living situations, which the men don't want to push for because they feel it's not the priority, because they're not the ones who have to chop wood all day to keep the water hot. And so this creates tensions between the men and the women, and also between Esperanza and Ramon. And as the men do go on strike and ignore the women's wishes, a law is passed that allows the company to arrest any striking miners. And the women point out a convenient loophole that the women are not minors and therefore they could continue striking without getting arrested. So they continue or losing their jobs. So the women end up taking up the picket line. And Ramon is not super happy about this. I love the bit that the reason why Ramon ends up actually, like, to go back a little bit, when the men are picketing, there's this great scene where Ramon doesn't even want Esperanza near the picket line, but other wives are coming and they're bringing coffee and stuff, and it's because he hates the other wives' coffee.
Because they brew coffee that tastes like zinc sludge, as Esperanza puts it in her voiceover.
And that's why he lets Esperanza even come to the picket line in the first place.
So she can make good coffee.
So, yeah, I don't want to give away too much of the movie. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about more of it, but basically it is the story of this strike and is the story of both race and gender relations. And it is about, you know, the need for less class disparity in the United States. And it is actually based on the true story of the Empire Zinc strike of 1950 to 1952. And the majority of the cast are the people who actually live in this town, who were part of that strike, who then become part of this movie, you know. And Juan Chacon is also a real person and not, I mean, he plays Ramon, so he plays a fictionalized person, but he is not a professional actor. This was his first acting experience. So, yeah.
So he was a minor who had been involved in that strike? Is that the impression? Or this?
I have to double check if he was actually specifically in this town when this strike happened, but he was, or if he came in later, but he was affiliated.
He's a member of the community. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
that's really awesome.
Really cool. I mean, this is something that I feel like, you know, like, I feel like if you look at like Rossellini movies in Italy, he was using like real people and like location film. This is filmed on location, like I said, in Silver City, New Mexico, but that was not something that was super common in the United States at this moment. So that's kind of our segue into important context. Though before we get into that, I just kind of wanted to ask what your initial thoughts were of the movie.
I really enjoyed the experience of watching this movie more than I think I thought I would going into it. I remember talking to you the other day where it's like, I don't know what I expected the movie to be from the title, but I did not expect it to be about miners and labor strikes. And then I was like, of course it is, because that makes sense. And so I honestly, I very much expected it to be like cut and dry, kind of boring. And it was so amazing. And I think part of what makes it interesting is I think company towns are both terrifying and fascinating as a concept to me. I remember reading like Grapes of Wrath in college and learning about what that was and how that worked. Where my mother used to live up until a couple of years ago, she's very close to a town in Louisiana called Fisher, which is no longer, but began as a company town named after this Fisher guy who used to own a lumber company that bought the town right at the beginning of the 20th century. And that's what it was for decades. And a lot of the original like company buildings still stand there. It's really weird. Like the big main lumber building is now this giant antique flea market, which feels like a nice fuck you to capitalism, you know? So that part I think is really interesting. And made me really interested in it. But also, I think what was weirdly what made this experience so wildly interesting to me is that I watched this on the heels of this current hyperfixation I have with the history of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant explosion. Which is, I don't know why I'm laughing, that's not funny. But I just watched this drama series about that, and there's so many fascinating parallels about like unsafe labor practices and about in their case, it's like partly the company, but it's mostly like the Soviet Union, but some like large authoritative governing body risking the lives of the people who make that thing a possibility for a bottom line. The, people who were mainly impacted by the power plant explosion were the people who lived in Pripyat, which is the city that's like 2 miles away from the power plant, which was specifically built to house the people who worked for the power plant. Like, it's just, my brain was just, and then there's also communists involved in this, and so I've just been living in this weird, like, communism, union, labor standards soup for the last, like, 2 weeks, and it's been a fascinating thing to make connections. But I really, really loved it. I really loved Esperanza and Ramon and their relationship and how you see it change. I'm sure we'll talk about this as we kind of look into your historical context, but I love that they have to kind of swap and inhabit each other's spaces in a really meaningful way. I think it makes them understand each other in a really impactful way that kind of makes them stronger. And like Esperanza says towards the end of the movie, like pushes them all forward or pushes them all up. This actually would be a great moment to bring in my tarot reading if you want to do that really quick.
Yeah. And also just to support what you're saying about how they have to change places. I love the really dramatic scene when Ramon is arrested for striking. Or actually, he's not arrested for striking. He's arrested for going after somebody who is going to betray the strike.
Yeah, he's arrested for harming a scab, even though he doesn't actually do anything to him.
Even though he doesn't touch him. As a matter of fact, he tells the guy that he's
like, I'm not going to work you over.
As so unworthy of even being beaten up or anything. But the cops basically are like, sure you did, and then use that as an excuse to enact police brutality upon Ramon. And while he's being beaten up by the cops, Esperanza goes into labor because she's into labor. There's lots of types of labor in the movie.
I didn't even think about that, yeah.
Yeah, because she's pregnant in the beginning of the film. And there's really interesting cutaways between Esperanza giving birth and Ramon getting beaten up and them both being in pain. And they both call out each other's names, which I just think it's a really heartbreaking and beautiful moment. But I also feel like that's a real turning point in the movie where it's almost like this moment of rebirth where they're both getting born into these new selves who are going to challenge how they've been performing gender up until this point.
Ooh, yes. Okay, yes. So the only I had initially had pulled this as a card for just Esperanza because like the story kind of centers around her, but I think this is
beautiful poetic voiceover throughout. Like shout out to good voiceover.
Yes, I have some glorious just like pull quotes and they're all from her voiceover. So this is mainly for her, but it definitely works for the two of them as like a partnership, which is the Chariot. So the Chariot is all about strength and determination and willpower. It's about like taking action to see that your goals are achieved. What is really neat though is that in the numbers of the Triumph cards, the Chariot comes immediately after the Lovers. And so if you are someone who reads like numbers into tarot, it's often read as like, this is signifying of you being able to take action after you have like set other things right. So after you have found balance in your life, either like within yourself or with others, with a partner, with a spouse. So I see this really working well for Esperanza, but as well as Ramon, because they're pretty contentious all the way throughout because they're going through, understandably, something really fucking difficult. But because of this having to inhabit each other's spaces and each other's roles and really being forced to understand what the other person has been going through, she can push herself and everyone up. And I think that's really neat. And that's exactly what the Chariot is about, is getting shit done, moving towards your goals, swiftly making change because you have gotten your house in order.
And pushing herself and everyone up is kind of the ultimate moral of the story. It's part of a beautiful speech she gives to Ramon that ends up finally sinking in for him about why they need to work together and forego the old ways in which they each had very specific gender roles. Okay. I love this movie. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. I think what really struck me about it is it's from 1954 and it could have been made yesterday.
The last note I have about this movie is I don't know how else to explain it, but this feels like a dozen or more movies that they have tried to make today that don't do it, but like that have failed, but this one does it right. And I have no other words to explain why that's how it feels, but that's exactly how it feels.
Yeah, it's like 70 years old, but it feels like it could have been made yesterday, but it actually feels like the really good version of the movies that were made yesterday. Yeah. And so that kind of brings me to, it's really important to understand the historical context of this movie because it was made under very unusual circumstances. And I think that we have to appreciate that before we can actually really dig into analyzing the film and really dig into the reviews of the film and the backlash it faced.
So this is our heads up that this is going to be a two-parter, folks. So strap in.
I make no promises that I'm done in two parts.
That's fair. That's fair.
So this first part, we're going to focus on the historical context. We'll dip our toes into the review pool. And I want to introduce some important characters because we're actually going to focus on one film critic in particular for the next part.
I love it. I appreciate that we have a villain.
Everybody's a villain in this story. Except for the people who made the movie. They did pretty good. Okay, so like I said already, it's pretty unusual at this time period to use real non-professional people as the actors, like non-professional in terms of the acting business, location filming. And then I was also, I think, actually screened in more independent movie theaters too when it did come out. We're also still in the moment of the Hays Code, which lasted until 1968. Just quick refresher, in case anybody doesn't remember what the Hays Code is. It basically was about protecting morality in the movies, and it was censorship. It was a way to censor the movies and to make sure they fit into a conservative ideal of what's okay. It's the reason why two people, like a man and a woman, can't be in bed together in this time period.
Oh my god. Oh, you do never see them in the same bed. That's so funny. You only ever see Esperanza in bed by herself.
I don't know that. Well, I think Ramon sits on the edge of her bed at some moment.
You don't see them sleeping in the same bed.
No, I don't know that this movie actually cared that much about the Hays Code.
That is just an interesting thing I noticed that, if anything, just speaks to their relationship, at least.
Yes, for sure. The 50s also witnessed the decline of the studio era, and there's sort of this strange in-between period where the studio system in Hollywood has really peaked, and the European influence of the auteur has not quite reached the prevalence it attains in the 1960s. This is also shortly after the 1948 Supreme Court ruling that stopped movie studios from owning movie theaters, and I don't know if this episode is going to come before or after our She Done Him Wrong episode, but we go into that ruling in more detail there. That 1948 date when that ruling happened arguably could be like the end of the studio system. So we're in this kind of weird in-between period already in filmmaking history. And then we're going to zoom out beyond Hollywood to talk about American history more broadly, because this is the era of McCarthyism and the second Red Scare. Not the first, the second one. So McCarthyism is named after the United States Senator Joseph McCarthy, who came from Wisconsin. In 1950, he gave a speech arguing that, quote, 57 communists had infiltrated the State Department, end quote. I think what we really think of when we think of McCarthyism are the McCarthy hearings. These were 36 days. They were investigations led by McCarthy. They were televised, and they happened in 1954, which is the same year that Salt of the Earth came out.
When I think of McCarthyism, I think of the bit in You've Got Mail when Parker Posey says of Greg Kinnear, "This man is the world's greatest living expert on Julius and Ethel Rosenberg."
Yeah. That would
Anyway,
be.
continue. Tell us about communism.
So from what I can tell, McCarthy didn't actually succeed in doing that much, but he created a vibe that became pervasive and that I think has a lasting legacy in American history. Basically, it kind of all came to an end when the journalist Edward R. Murrow revealed the bullshit, and the whole thing totally died with McCarthy in 1957 when he died.
Woo! I mean, poor man.
But during this period, we also have the second Red Scare. So this is the post-World War II, Cold War era. People seem to consider the Red Scare to be 1947 to 1954, again, the year Salt of the Earth came out. This is, so in Congress, we have the House Un-American Activities Committee. According to Britannica, they conducted investigations into alleged communist activities by individuals who included well-known artists and entertainers. Among those investigated were film director Elia Kazan, playwrights Arthur Miller and Bertolt Brecht, folk singer Pete Seeger, which if you just saw the movie A Complete Unknown, that features Pete Seeger's
Oh, okay, yeah.
hearing, yeah, and the so-called Hollywood 10 motion picture producers, directors, and screenwriters whose refusal to answer the committee's questions regarding their possible communist affiliations resulted in their incarceration for contempt of Congress, as well as blacklisting by the Hollywood studios for most of them.
There you go. If I'm remembering correctly, have you ever seen The Way We Were? Because if you haven't, we should probably do an episode on that because it's amazing.
No, I haven't.
It's Barbra Streisand, Robert Redford. He becomes a Hollywood screenwriter and is I don't know if it's suggested like he's one of the Big Ten, like because he's a fictional character.
Really into Robert Redford movies right now.
Oh my god, you should absolutely.
I just watched Indecent Proposal.
Ah, yes. Okay, you should absolutely watch it. It's
which I just want everybody to know. I would hella pick Robert Redford and $1 million.
I don't even like men, and I would pick Robert Redford and $1 million. Are you kidding me?
I know.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Woody Harrelson.
I mean, yes, I also love Woody Harrelson, but like to be fair, like if the option was Woody Harrelson and $1 million, I'd pick that too. Fuck yes. Anyway, so yes, it's implied in this like it takes place during the same kind of era, and it's implied that he and his like bunch of Hollywood folks are a part of this same issue. So if this is a particular area of history that you're interested in, and in Hollywood's involvement as well, that could be a good film for you to explore. Both listeners and Laura, you would probably just enjoy it because also Robert Redford. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, he's in a uniform for many various parts of it. Yeah, you'd like that, I figure. He's in a Navy uniform for various moments of the film.
Well, I'll have to add that to my watch list.
This is not for podcast reasons at all, but you know the bit in Sex and the City where Carrie decides she's going to go up to Big after his wedding and say, "Your girl is lovely, Hubble." That's from the way we were.
Oh, okay. I'm going to have to watch this.
You will.
Also, little side note, I thought this was so fascinating, but one of the title cards in the movie says, "Our scene is New Mexico, land of the free Americans who inspired this film, home of the brave Americans who played most of its roles." So I just thought that was, I mean, we could unpack that more later, but I thought it was really interesting how, you know, these people have been blacklisted from Hollywood. They know they're making a movie that people are going to call un-American, and they're really trying to emphasize that they're the true patriots here. And I also explained as well,
they're the salt of the earth.
Yes, and we have this like Mexican community that's been segregated from the white community as well. And I also think it's really interesting that they're really trying to emphasize that, like, no, these are all Americans, and really push back against the racial segregation that's happening at this time as well. And I bring that up now because I think it's really interesting that Pete Seeger is singled out as one of the more recognizable people who was, you know, investigated by the House Un-American Activities Committee because he was investigated for singing "This Land Is Your Land."
What?
You know, the really nice, sweet...
You meant he was arrested for writing that song?
I actually am pretty sure Woody Guthrie wrote it, but
yeah.
Pete Seeger performed it a lot.
I thought that was a supposed to be a very American song.
I did too. Apparently, it was considered commie bullshit at the time.
What wasn't considered commie bullshit?
At least
that's a
according
shorter
to the
list.
movie, a complete unknown. But anyway, I just think that that's kind of interesting that, you know, I mean, I think what that song and what this title card both have in common is that they're saying we're all Americans and we're all sharing this country. And I think the pushback against communism at this time is largely has to do with this pushback against, you know, a racially heterogeneous society.
I did have to do a little bit of Googling into communism because, again, my most recent...
We're going to get more into it.
Oh, good. Okay, because, again, my most recent understanding and experience with communism is, you know, watching the fallout of the Soviet Union because of the Chernobyl explosion. And, like, I'm watching this and I'm like, okay, I know why these communists are bad. I get that. And then I'm like, why are the ones why are the people that they're calling commies in America so bad? Because I don't think they do the same thing or believe the same situation. And I got into a real rabbit hole about communism on Wikipedia, and I don't think I understand it any better.
Yeah, well, I want to be careful in trying to answer that question because it involves a knowledge of history, both national and international, that I don't know that I have expertise in.
It is not a question. It's just I am curious to understand the history around this exclusion of these people a little bit better because, again, my brain is still like, communism, Gorbachev, the Soviet Union.
I want to make it very clear that by defending this movie, I'm definitely not defending Joseph
We
Stalin.
are not communists. Attention, FBI agents that live in both of our computers. We are not communists. Like the oldest profession in the world, we're capitalists, as Miss Scarlett from Clue would say.
I was going to say I'm a socialist.
I mean, no, I'm just quoting that I'm not a capitalist, but I love that bit where she's like, communism is a red herring. I'm a capitalist.
Literally red. Well, you know, I think that that's something that's actually really important. And I don't want to get into the whole history of the United States Communist Party because I'm not an expert in it. But what I do want to say is that this movie and my love for it has nothing to do with being pro-USSR. And I think something that's really important, and I can't speak to all the political views of the people who made it, but I do think what is really important is that there's a man, Clinton Jenks, who the character whose last name is Barnes, who is the
organizer.
Yes.
Blonde guy.
That character is based on Clinton Jenks, and he's actually played by Clinton Jenks.
Really?
In the movie.
That's so cool.
But the labor historian James J. Lawrence, which was the name I was looking for earlier.
There you go. We'll insert it in post.
He wrote this book that is called The Suppression of Salt of the Earth: How Hollywood, Big Labor, and Politicians Blacklisted a Movie in Cold War America. This book came out in 1999, and he wrote a great article called Mining the Salt of the Earth that was published in the Wisconsin Magazine of History in like 2001, 2002. And he was a professor of history at University of Wisconsin, Marathon County. He retired a long time ago. He passed away like 12 years ago. He really, I mean, if anybody's like an expert on this movie, it's him. And he explains in his article his whole research process. I mean, he has read everything you could possibly read relating to this movie. So he's largely my source for historical context here. But something that he talks about having found himself beginning to ask while he was doing this research was, quote, what was radical about Jenks's commitment to the struggle for economic equality and social justice in the Southwest? Because at the end of the day, all Jenks and the other protesters were fighting for was, you know, enough money to put food on their table and indoor plumbing.
Queremos baños, queremos comida. I don't recall the exact Spanish, but I'm absolutely saying that wrong. I apologize.
Yeah, I think it's like queremos.
Queremos. That was it. Queremos baños, because it kind of rhymed. Okay, yep.
Yes. There's a chant that the women do when they get put in prison that is...
we want bathrooms, we want food.
Beds, and we want bathrooms.
That's great. I don't know a lot of Spanish, but at some point I was like, are they yelling about bathrooms? I love it.
Yeah, I think something that's really important is to not get caught up in the communist association with the USSR at this time, and to remember that what this movie is promoting and what these people were fighting for is access to basic human needs.
Okay.
And the argument that everybody should be treated as equal, which like it says in our founding documents.
Mm-hmm. And also like in the Bible, I think somewhere, probably. I don't know. That's helpful. That's a helpful distinction for me. Because again, my brain is just like Chernobyl, USSR, Soviet Union. So it's helpful to understand that at least bit of a distinction. Thank you.
This is what leftist liberal politics looked like in America in the 1950s. And a lot of the reactions against it and the desire to really associate the Communist Party with the USSR, I think comes from conservative paranoia or a desire to create paranoia in more conservative people. We don't know anything about
that doesn't
today.
sound familiar at all on this day of recording January 20th, 2025.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So something that I actually thought was kind of interesting reading about the Blacklist is I actually felt like there was a lot of like kind of overlap between the themes of the Blacklist in Hollywood and the Hays Code in that they both seemed about making sure that studios could remain in control and keep making money. In Lawrence's article, he actually explains that so, you know, in case you don't know what blacklisted means, basically once Hollywood blacklisted people who they felt were not aligned with the political values they should be supporting, which really could be like anybody. It basically means you were out of work. Like your career was over.
Yep.
Lawrence writes, the Motion Picture Producers Association, the
MPPA.
Yes.
I put too many different double letters. Yes. Okay.
Waldorf Statement, which declared the industry's intention to deny employment to anyone who advocated the overthrow of the government by force, which referred specifically to communists and fellow travelers, but in practice included left liberals of all shades. The result was an industry-wide blacklist and a wounded generation of Hollywood artists that included hundreds of men and women, screenwriters, producers, directors, actors, and stagehands who were unable to find work.
Stagehands.
Yes.
Like, come on.
I think that's kind of a catch-all phrase.
I know, but it's like even if you're like the kid who runs mail in the offices.
You're a commie, get out.
You're a commie, get out. Fellow travelers, is that a term that goes along? Like, are you familiar with that at all? Because there's a film that came out called Fellow Travelers.
I think Fellow Travelers is just an expression for anybody who's like...
So like communists and others of that ilk. Okay. Laura, tell me about the Hollywood 10.
I will. All right. So the Hollywood 10 were investigated. They refused to answer questions and they were held in contempt of Congress in 1947. They each served prison sentences of 6 months to a year. Their careers were ruined and the majority of them never worked again. The blacklist ended in the 1960s, which I feel like is one of those things that's like, wow, that was too long. We're going to get into Professor Lawrence's article because he's got a lot of really good, juicy background stuff. And like this man has seriously gone to every archive. Ooh. He has read the papers of the screenwriter. He read thousands of pages of FBI files on Salt of the Earth and its director, Herbert Bieberman. And that is a quote. And Herbert Bieberman, oh shit, I called him Michael Bieberman in the beginning.
You did call him Michael Bieberman, and I thought it was strange that it was two people named Michael. I think you said Michael Herbert Bieberman, if that helps.
Okay, his name is Herbert Bieberman, and he was one of the Hollywood 10.
I love somebody who goes in depth down the research rabbit hole as you do.
Well, I don't go as in depth as Professor Lawrence. He spent 5 years digging through archives.
Right, that's fair. But I think like I appreciate people who like get really into the research, and I think that's what you do also.
I do get really into the research.
You do. We were supposed to record this on Saturday for the record.
I needed more time for my research.
It's now Monday.
But that's because on Saturday, my research hit a plot twist. Ooh. And I didn't realize we were going to have a principal character who would become the villain of our story.
Oh, right, the villain. Okay. All right, so let's hear the context and the history.
So something that I thought was interesting, that was like a little side note in this article, that they said it came from one of the film title stills. It was not in the title still of the version that I watched on Prime, but maybe appeared somewhere else. But the quote said, although national boycotts kept Salt of the Earth out of U.S. theaters, which I'm actually not sure what that means because there are lots of reviews of it playing in U.S. theaters, but whatever. The film played in China for over 15 years, as well as in Eastern and Western Europe, which I'm also like, so Europe. The Soviet Union, Central and South America, and Canada. Despite the film's popularity, no profits made their way into the pockets of the creators. The U.S. government blocked earnings from foreign markets.
That was not in the title card of what I watched on Prime either. There were 2 versions of the film on Prime, though. When I searched it on my phone, one was available to rent or buy, and one was included with ads. So that's the one I watched.
Yeah, that's what I watched too.
Capitalism won that one.
The other thing too is like a little bit of background about Mine Mill, which is our union that funded this. Like I said, they were kicked out of the big like union of unions for allegedly being communists. But I think something that Lawrence points out, and I think this goes back to your question about like, what does this really mean to be a communist at this time? Lawrence writes,
yeah, because I feel like this kind of communist and unions would seem like they would go hand in hand. But anyway.
Lawrence writes that, quote, more significant to Grant County miners, which is where this story takes place, was the union's commitment to full community organizing that encompassed the entire fabric of social and economic life. So he really emphasizes that, like, at the level of the miners, I mean, whatever may or may not have been happening at the top ranks of this union, at the level of the miners, this wasn't about like USSR communism. This was about a union that was willing to stand up for, you know, their basic needs, both socially, economic,
bathrooms and safety.
Yes. So we have our friend Clinton Jenks, who plays, I don't remember what his first name is, but the character is named Barnes in the movie.
Barnes, yeah. I know his wife's name is Ruth.
And his wife, Jenks's wife, Virginia, plays Ruth in the movie. So they were in it as a couple.
Oh, that's fun because I liked her.
Sassy.
Can we just take a minute to appreciate, like, if you had not told me, and if it had not said in the title card that like a large portion of the cast was like people in the community and not professional actors, I would not have thought that that was the case. Like, not that they're like amazing or fantastic. I do
think Ramon is actually pretty amazing.
I do think he's amazing for sure. Actually, him especially.
Such a big, complicated role be your first experience.
Yes.
That's pretty amazing.
It was pretty amazing, but like I think they all seemed professional and like they were doing a really great job for what acting looked like at the time. And I have to assume that it's because they were like genuinely believing in and supporting the message of the film that was making. Anyway, but I love that about it. So
yeah. So Jenks, real life Jenks, character Barnes, he goes to New Mexico to help organize the Mexican American community. He helps establish what's called Local 890, which I think is kind of like a local version of the union, like a local chapter or something.
Like a local chapter, yeah.
And he participates in the Empire Zinc strike. He's the one who gets Jericho, who, if you remember, was one of our producers and who's affiliated with the Independent Producers Corporation, which is the group of blacklisted Hollywood people who are like, well, we're going to come together and we're going to make our own movie company.
We're going to make our movies anyway.
Yes. So Jenks finds Jericho and he gets Jericho to come out to New Mexico, and he's the one who convinces Jericho that this should be a movie. Jericho goes back to IPC and convinces them to finance the movie.
That's really cool.
It is really cool. And so I actually also, to your point about like communism at this time, this I think some of what Lawrence says explains that. So I kind of want to read this in answer to you. Writes that he gained a clearer appreciation of the ways in which the Progressive Party of 1948, various members of the Communist Party, and the militant Asociación Nacional Mexico Americana. Sorry.
You started real strong.
I know. I almost. Yeah. played a crucial role in community organizing in the post-war Southwest. It was equally clear that the democratic socialist ideas embraced by some Grant County workers had little to do with the Stalinist quote, line, end quote, or Soviet foreign policy objectives, and everything to do with the improvement of the economic and social conditions that confronted them in their daily lives. So I think it's just really, again, I will emphasize, I think there's a certain amount of...
We are not communists.
I think there's a lot of fear-mongering involved with when we talk about communism in U.S. history. That's not fair. So Lawrence continues, and I'll just also explain this. So he ends up actually getting to talk to Paul Jericho, like years later. And he says that he learned much about the production details and the mechanics of the boycott. Most revealing, however, was Jericho's frank treatment of the Communist Party's limited role in the creative process surrounding the film. Jericho's remarks reinforced my growing perception that the party had, if anything, impeded the production process, and, as it turned out, had failed to help the SALT group when the opportunity arose. Our conversation was influential in shaping my view that the artists had successfully maintained full control of their intellectual property as they shot and edited their film. I also realized that despite the filmmakers' interaction with communist politics, ultimately the Communist Party as an official body had no direct creative impact on the film itself. It was at best an uneasy liaison. And I think that this is important to point out, because even though I think this film is like a brilliant exploration of leftist liberal politics that are still relevant today, it is not a dogmatic film, and it is not propaganda. It is actually really good storytelling.
That's what I think it is. The note I had before about, like, this feels like a dozen or more movies they've tried to make today and failed, but this one does it right. It's that when this attempt is made in, like, contemporary film industry, it feels very dogmatic. It feels very didactic in a way that this one just feels good.
It does. And I, unfortunately, and this is a bit of a side note, but I think we're heading into an era where dogmatism is going to influence the arts in a way that I don't think is going to be good, regardless of whether or not I agree with the underlying politics. I don't think dogmatism has any role in artistic expression, and I think that that's actually really dangerous. And I think that this film does a really good job of taking inspiration from the politics and using art as a vehicle to enlighten people or to get people to actually question their biases without being dogmatic at all and being artistic.
Mm-hmm. Heard that.
A lot of people tried to ruin this movie.
Of course.
Why I said we have a lot of villains here. One of them is Howard Hughes, the
airplane
guy who also made movies, who Leonardo DiCaprio played in a movie.
I can't say of course enough.
Yeah. Howard Hughes actually, and this is going to come up again later, but Howard Hughes actually outlined how the U.S. government could stop this movie from being disseminated to the public.
Mm-hmm.
And we're actually going to circle back to that, but Lawrence points out that Hughes did not mention the deportation of the film's star, Mexican actress Rosario Revueltas.
Oh.
But as Lawrence writes, the Department of Immigration later did just that days before the film's shooting was over. So she was actually deported for...
Oh my god.
I mean, I don't know if she's deported for being part of this movie, but obviously she was deported for being part of this movie.
That's exactly why but the official reason is probably going to say something else. Yeah. Just like Ramon getting arrested for not beating up Scab.
You know, I also want to point out too, like, I think it's very easy to just praise and celebrate this movie endlessly, but I'm also not trying to put it out there. It's like, I'm not trying to be dogmatic and say that this is a utopian film either. There's always more work to be done. You know, for instance, Revueltas faced kind of racist stereotypes when casting her and questions about her ability that definitely had more to do with racism than actual genuine questions about her acting ability. And once Revueltas was cast, she and Sonia Dahl Bieberman, who is one of the other producers, actually really, really supported the casting of Chacon, and they had to really convince the white dudes they were working with to actually
give him such a big role,
to give him a chance. And I will say too, in real life, Lawrence does say that, you know, the women who did participate in the rail strike, you know, although they may have gained something in the moment, that didn't necessarily have lasting impact as we would like. And also, given where we're at here in 2025, clearly there's not a lot of lasting impacts.
I'm sure what a moment I really, really love is, I think it's immediately after, or in that same scene where she's giving the speech to Ramon about like pushing everyone up in a moment of just like trying to, you know, turn off this argument and shut her down. He raises his hand to strike her and she grabs it and says like, that's the old way. We're not going back to that. And that's a really powerful moment for them and their family. But I agree with you. I think it's probably not unlikely that, having gotten what they wanted, a lot of these individual families probably shifted back into the old ways of things that were just easy because everything was easy again. So you're right.
But I do, to go back to the positive note, this film did accomplish a lot that I do think is worth celebrating. And though there's always more work to be done, I mean, this is a photograph of the crew, and you can see from this photograph that it was truly a racially diverse undertaking, you know, on screen and off screen, and people came together from all walks of life to make this movie possible. And I think that's one of the reasons why it is such a successful movie that feels so relevant even 70 years later. One other way in which this movie was thwarted, I'll read this little blurb. So Lawrence writes, I was able to resolve at least one of the outstanding questions about the early attack on Salt of the Earth. It was clear that the executives of the Screen Actors Guild had launched a national publicity campaign against the film by leaking an exclusive story detailing IPC's on-site shooting in New Mexico to the anti-communist labor columnist Victor Reisel in February 1953. And this is just a fun fact that I learned. But at this time period, do you know who was president of the Screen Actors Guild?
Who?
Ronald Reagan.
Oh my God. Oh God.
We have some other former presidents who are going to come into this story.
Of course. Okay. I'm going to unclench my jaw so we can continue.
So I want to read to you two really brief reviews that are not by our main villain, but just to give you kind of what the reaction is. All right. So this article came from Valley Times, which was a newspaper out of North Hollywood, California. It was published on May 31st, 1954. And it was titled Second Week for Salt of Earth Film. And that's significant because it means that people were going to see it. So it stayed in the theater for another week. So the article reads, with audiences reported on the increase, the much discussed motion picture Salt of the Earth goes into the second week of its current run at the Markle Theater in Hollywood. The local engagement thus keeps pace with the record-breaking runs in New York City, San Francisco, and Silver City, New Mexico. One of the screen's most honored actresses, Rosaura Revueltas, and a real-life miner, Juan Chacon, are the co-stars of Salt of the Earth. Screenplay of the current feature, written by Academy Award winner Michael Wilson, concerns the love story of a young Mexican-American zinc miner and his wife, played against the background of a long and bitter strike. The wife is played by Miss Revueltas, who is a two-time winner of Mexico's equivalent of the Oscar, while her husband is played by Chacon. Hundreds of Mexican-American miners and their families play the supporting roles in this unusual film, which was made on the actual New Mexico location. So I wanted to bring this in because we're going to talk a lot about negative reactions to this movie, but I like that this review shows people wanted to see it and they were talking about it, and there was a demand for filmmaking like this at the time. So the powers that be that might have been trying to thwart the dissemination of this film, but there was an audience for it. I mean, some of these people might have been hate watching it, but there was an audience for it.
what I love about this review is it's saying like almost exactly what we were saying at the top of this recording, which is like how amazing the like relationship depicted is and their like strong connection, and how incredible it is that the cast is made up of the community of people who suffered this tragedy. And so it's, I know you're gearing up to tell me that a lot of the reviews were just panning it or trying to blacklist it, but it is really refreshing to see that, at least with some people and, you know, the viewing audience, we kind of had the same things to love about it, you know, 70 years later.
Yeah, there were people who actually at the time appreciated what a feat this film was.
A feat. That's it. That's the way to describe it. Exactly. A feat.
So from the same newspaper on March 15th, 1954, we also get an article called Police Guard Premiere of Salt of the Earth. So I think this must have been a reprint because they have New York in the beginning. So I think the newspaper might have like reprinted something from a New York paper. It says, there was little excitement either inside or outside a neighborhood movie theater last night when a film, Salt of the Earth, hailed in advance as controversial, had its world premiere. It opened at the Grand Theater, an independently operated house in Yorkville. A single searchlight swept the sky outside in mock Hollywood style, and an extra detail of police stood by in case of any demonstration against the film, which was previously denounced in Congress as communist-inspired. The neighborhood went about its usual Sunday night affairs, however, and after the premiere showing had ended, there were about 150 persons quietly standing in line for the first general public showing at $1.20. Unless the film contains dialectical subtleties beyond the ken of a non-traveler, and therefore of dubious propaganda value, Salt of the Earth emerges as a screen offering with the dramatic impact and intellectual appeal of a soap opera, which I think is kind of rude. But I just think that that's really interesting that they were gearing up for, like, people are going to come protest this movie, and instead you just get 150 people who just want to go see it.
Who are just excited to watch it. Yeah.
And we're waiting in line quietly.
With $1.20.
I know, those were the days.
Well, no, I'm just thinking about the inflation and going like, that's
maybe
more than
the days. I don't know.
I'm thinking like that's more than I would have expected to pay for a movie then. But also it reminds me of a movie theater in the mall in my hometown would play movies like 4 months after they left the theaters, like kind of like the way they did at the Grand Sierra Resort in Nevada. And for $2 you could get a ticket, which was $1.25, and then for 75 cents you could get a little tray that had popcorn and a single candy and a small soda.
Nice.
In like 2005.
Nice.
And I'm like, oh, those were the days, man.
Those were the days.
We're going to see Garfield 6 months after it's no longer popular, and it's only $2.
Oh boy.
I'm curious about that inflation, actually. Let me look that up.
Okay. While you're doing that, I'm going to introduce the principal characters of our next episode.
Bad guys.
Yes, bad guys. So our first bad guy is Donald L. Jackson. He's a representative from California who tried to stop this film from being made. He does come up.
I hate his name already.
I know,
but,
it sounds like a dick.
Yeah. Oh my god, that's like a $14 movie ticket. Yeah, that's pretty the same as now. Yeah. Okay, continue.
And speaking of dicks, when you Google Donald L. Jackson, one of the first things that comes up is
let me.
Yes. Are you ready?
I wanted to Google.
Oh,
okay.
It's a 1969 speech from Nixon, whose first name was Richard, which is Dick.
Yeah.
That's my connection. Comes up, and Nixon is swearing him into a new committee, and he calls Jackson's work in Congress exceptional and talks about how they're friends. So I feel like that just tells you enough about this guy that he was friends with Nixon.
Yep.
Also kind of sad that when you hear what he tried to do to this movie in 1953 and 1954, that he's still being praised for his exceptional work in 1969. Yeah, I know. History is going to be disappointing in these episodes.
Yay. Okay, so this is not the reviewer. That's the ultimate villain, right?
This is a representative in Congress.
Congress.
Yes,
gotcha,
representative from California.
Okay.
This guy wants to just stop this movie from ever being made. And he actually writes a letter to Howard Hughes, who came up earlier. And Howard Hughes writes back advising him on how to prevent this movie from being made, which he basically says it's too late to do that because they've already finished shooting. But then basically goes on to tell him everything that they would need in post-production and all the people with the specific skills and equipment they would need access to. And basically says, so cut them off from all of that and then they won't be able to make the movie.
Okay, this is a scene from the movie we're talking about. Do you know what I'm about to bring up?
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
At one point, when the women take over the strike and the company men don't know what to do, they're like, we have to hit them where it hurts. We have to find the women who appear to be like in charge and running things, and we have to find the women who have like big families to support.
Yes.
And we have to get them out of this fight.
Yeah.
And they bring back the scab from before because he's part of the community and he knows the people. And they stand him in front of the picket line and he points to every important, pivotal woman to then be arrested to stop it.
Also, one of them he identifies as the pretty one, and I was like,
yeah,
rude.
Yeah, it's weird. It's real weird.
It is really, that scene is like so cringy and so infuriating.
I also, like, it's cringy and infuriating for so many things, and I think I was so mad at him that the one thing I ended up like, you're like, oh my god, at was he points at another woman and goes, her in the blue dress, and then it pans to the woman he's talking about, and she's not wearing a dress, she's wearing a shirt and a sweater and a skirt.
Yeah.
And I was just so mad at everything he was doing. I was like, that's not even a dress, you dumbass.
I love it.
Anyway, but yes, Howard Hughes is doing exactly what that scab is doing. Like, literally exactly.
Yeah. And so our buddy Lawrence...
It says snow starting in 52 minutes. Okay.
Exciting. All right, so our buddy Lawrence writes, more depressing, of course, was his, Jenks's, dismal story of the intimidation and censorship that marked the... My pizza's here in one moment, please. I'll be right back. So our buddy Lawrence writes, more depressing, of course, was his, Jenks's, dismal story of the intimidation and censorship that marked the production and suppression of Salt of the Earth. The decision by the leadership of the various unions involved in the motion picture industry to keep critical technical processing from being completed, coupled with the political posturing of Congressman Donald L. Jackson, made the successful completion of the film a near miracle. So I want to read this one article that references Jackson. So this is from the Ventura County Star from Ventura, California, and it came out in August 7th, 1954. And the title is Congressman Blasts Red Tinted Movie.
Oh my god, red tinted.
I know. Representative Donald L. Jackson, Republican, California, said Thursday that the film Salt of the Earth is, quote, carrying distortion, inaccuracy, and American-made red propaganda to millions of persons. In a House speech denouncing the film, which was made at Silver City, New Mexico, Jackson pointed out that it had won highest honors along with a Russian film at the International Film Festival in Prague, Czechoslovakia. Quote, Soviet and satellite film honors are not being bestowed these days on any film production which does not further enhance and glorify the Soviet system or seek to forward its purposes of economic and political aggression, end quote, Jackson said. Quote, it is interesting to note that the Soviet film this isn't a quote. It is interesting to note that the Soviet film Faithful Friends shared the top honors with Salt of the Earth. The faithful friends of the Soviet Union and Hollywood have been faithful indeed. Oh, that was a quote, actually.
That's fine. The International Film Festival was in Prague?
Yeah.
Okay.
Was Czechoslovakia, was that part of the USSR at this time?
I do not know. That's a good question. Because I was going to be like, it's not like this was a Soviet-run film contest. And they were like, you know what's great? Salt of the Earth. We love it here in the USSR. It just happens that...
apparently they did love it in the USSR. It was a very popular movie screen there, but...
Right, but that's not the... We're attacking this point he made here right now.
Yes. And it's also not the point of, like, okay, so maybe it did... you know, maybe the Soviets were okay with screening this movie and it aligned with whatever they wanted to show. But, like, you know, Stalin and his crew was abusing their people. That was not true, like, Marxist socialism happening there. And again, the point of this movie is that women and men are equal. People of different races are equal, and everybody should have indoor plumbing.
Everybody should have hot running water.
And safe working conditions, and the ability to put food on their tables. And those, frankly,
radios.
they're not communists. They shouldn't even be liberal or leftist or right-wing.
Right, it's
they're
just
basic human
human
needs.
rights. Yeah.
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 So,
what else does Donald say about it?
well, we're done with Donald for now. Enough.
Thank God.
Yeah. We're moving on. All right. So there's a couple of these characters are actually organizations. We'll hear references, and I'll read an example of this, but references to a group called the American Legion, which is a veterans association.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds familiar.
But it has a history, as far as I can tell up to this day, of being ultra conservative, and at this time period, it had like all these counter-subversive or anti-subversive programs that were really trying to combat liberal policy making at the time.
See, when I think of American Legion now, what I think of is because
I never heard of it before.
Okay, so that makes a bit more sense. It's I picture like a very specific place, and it's like kind of like a bar, like a dive bar. And it's sort of like a, you know, have you ever seen like a VFW building?
No.
Okay, I think these are very uniquely Southern things.
Okay.
Like the VFW and the American Legion are, as it would note, the VFW stands for Veterans of Foreign Wars, as they would suggest by the titles, national organizations. And I don't know if they're only in the South, or you just see more of them in the South, or just because my whole family...
It seems like every state has their own legion that is part of the overall American Legion. I think. Right.
So then this may be just like a culturally Southern thing, is that they are also social gathering places.
Okay.
And so like the American Legion is often like you go to meet somebody at the American Legion or at the VFW and you have a drink, or they're doing like a blue plate special and you go get lunch together, or that's where they do bingo, or they have like an open mic night at the American Legion. And so like when I think of the American Legion, I just think of a bunch of like beard up 70-year-old men sitting on bar stools and complaining about the youths, and I am bothered by them, but not intimidated in the slightest.
All right, well, they did a lot of complaining about the youths in the 1950s, so I also at first confused this with the Roman Catholic National Legion of Decency, but they actually kind of overlap in this regard, because the Legion of Decency apparently often wrote about morality in films, so, and
that's
was
fair,
also
and there's a lot of Catholicism going on in this movie as well.
Ventura County Star, May 17th, 1954, publishes an article called Legion Warns About Controversial Film. And again, I think they might be reprinting from another place, because this one is Chicago. And it says, a motion picture theater manager has accused the Illinois American Legion of using, quote, confidential smears, end quote, and, quote, intimidation, end quote, concerning the controversial picture Salt of the Earth. M.A. Turman, manager of the Cinema Annex Theater, said the state's Legion's anti-subversive commission sent him a letter of warning about the picture. The Legion has opposed the showing of Salt of the Earth on the grounds, quote, that it was an endeavor on the part of the communistic element to produce the greatest communist propaganda picture ever developed. Which we so far have seen no evidence of.
No, of course not. That's like, oh my god, I'm not even, okay, yeah. I'm not even going to get into the metaphor I wanted to, because it's just going to make me even more mad, but that's absolutely absurd.
All right, so it's important to have this background on who the Legion is. There's two other groups that I would like to pull out, and those are two newspapers, the Tidings and the Brooklyn Tablet, which when I Googled them, turns out still exist to this day. One of them is a Catholic newspaper based in LA that started in 1897. The other one is a Catholic newspaper based in New York. They actually describe themselves as the newspaper of the Diocese of Brooklyn, serving Brooklyn and Queens since 1908. And judging by the headline story today, it's real Trumpy.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I cannot imagine anything right now more horrifying than a Catholic newspaper.
Yeah, I didn't even think that was a thing, but it is.
I didn't think that was a thing either, and I grew up Catholic, and I am grateful for my mother either not knowing that was or shielding it from me.
Yeah, so the tidings in the tablet come up a lot in our reviews that we're going to review in the next episode. And they come up a lot because of our principal villain of the story. His name is William H. Mooring. He's actually born in the United Kingdom, but came to the United States.
How old, before I start yelling and get mad, was he like a child here and he was raised here, or did he move here as an adult and become a citizen? Do you know?
I think he moved here as an adult, but I would have to check.
Then you don't have a dog in this fight, mister.
Wait. It gets worse. In
No!
1940, he converted to Catholicism.
Oh, God, why?
And, quote, this is from a 1955 article I found on the Catholic News Archive, a site I hope never to have to go on again.
I'm so sorry you had to see that.
But they say, Mooring, quote, was asked to evolve an authentic Hollywood service of film news and reviews suitable for the Catholic press. Didn't even know there was a Catholic press. This is a whole scary rabbit hole.
It sounds like some Scientology bullshit, actually.
I know. To continue, his syndicated column, Hollywood in Focus, which includes a running commentary and critical evaluations of all new movies, now appears in leading Catholic publications throughout the U.S., Canada, and abroad. So the reason why he becomes our principal villain is because of this column, Hollywood in Focus. He writes about this freaking movie, Salt of the Earth, again and again and again in his column. And then the tablet over in Brooklyn reprints his work.
No.
So that is where we're going to leave off for tonight and where we're going to continue next time. And I just want to, in conclusion, we're going to go over the critical backlash against this film next time, the range of reviews it received, maybe even dig a little bit deeper into the two most significant books written on the subject, or that might be a whole other podcast series. We'll see. And I want to conclude too, and we're not going to do this here, we're going to do this next time or the time after that. But what's really interesting about this movie is how its critical reception has changed over time.
Oh, God, I'm sure.
It actually has quite an interesting history of it kind of coming back over the decades and new waves of criticism appearing in response to it. So I think that would be really interesting. The last major wave that I read about so far was in the 90s. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I also speculate a little bit about how 25 years later we think it would be received.
I think you mean 35 years, if it was the 90s.
Oh, I was thinking like 1999, but yeah.
Oh,
30,
that also makes sense.
25
to 35 years.
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah.
Whatever. But I want to come back to our buddy Lawrence, who is like the man for understanding the production of this film and its significance for the history of labor relations in the United States.
Tell us, Larry.
Something that he highlighted towards the end of his article about his process of researching this movie is that it ultimately symbolizes the struggle for artistic freedom and a struggle that is ultimately successful for these filmmakers. And I just kind of wanted to end there because I think that that's a really important thing to think about. Like, it is the ultimate expression of artistic freedom. These people were kicked out of from the big Hollywood studio system. They formed their own corporation together. They found other people who had stories that needed to be told, and they worked with them, and they made a movie completely independently. And it was a movie that, from what we saw from some reviews so far, found an audience.
Audience willing to pay $1.20.
Yeah, in 1954.
In 1954. Well, I can't wait to... I don't even remember his name. He's so insignificant. What's his name again?
William H. Mooring, our film critic.
H. Mooring. I am absolutely going to confuse him with William H. Macy at some point. Which is a shame, because he's a delight.
Yeah. But also a scumbag.
Is William H. Macy a scumbag, or does he just play a lot of scumbags?
He played a lot of scumbags. I don't know about him in real life.
I hope he's not a scumbag. He seems like he could be a decent guy, but he does, Frank Gallagher is a pretty big scumbag. Well, I can't wait to hear more about William H.
Mooring.
Thank you. And his weird Catholic hate about this movie. It's so funny because, like, they're very, like, Christian families.
Yeah, they're super Catholic. I mean,
they're super Catholic.
There's a couple very Catholic scenes in here, but
like, they celebrate her Saints' Day, which, like, I know is a thing, but I also, like, never grew up in a household or with friends who did that.
Yeah, and there's the baby's baptism in the church.
And the baptism. And then, like,
starts with a prayer to the Virgin Mary.
Because she feels so terrible for wishing her baby wouldn't be born into this life. She's like, I immediately went to the Virgin to pray about how sinful that was.
But, I mean, I think that's the other thing with, like, being didactic or dogmatic is that those notions want to categorize people, and people aren't easily categorizable. Like, yes, like, these were union members who had a strike and who were fighting for left-wing ideals, but that doesn't mean that they weren't also Catholics. And also, the Catholic newspapers might have been publishing against this movie, and that might have been aligned with people like Donald L. Jackson, but that doesn't also mean that in the 60s, when Kennedy gets elected president, that there wasn't still skepticism about Catholics in the United States. And, like, wasn't that the whole thing when Kennedy became president? They were like, oh, what if he answers to the Pope before the United States of America?
Was Kennedy Catholic? I didn't even know that.
Yes, he was.
Wow.
He was the first, and I think only Catholic
probably only
president so far.
I would guess only.
So, Catholics can be really conservative and can toe the conservative American line and then also be victims of discrimination.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah, because all these identities are complicated.
Yes, there you go. That's right.
Ramon and Esperanza are not really... they're not liberals and left-wing people in the sense that, like, the beatniks were, I mean, they are, like, traditional Catholic. They probably are pretty conservative people.
Exactly. It comes back to what you said several times already, which is, like, the things they are asking for are not, like, radical left-wing ideas. They're just basic human necessities.
Yeah. I wish we had an expert on the history of American party systems and liberal versus conservative ideology, because it'd be really interesting to have their thoughts here. But that's all I got for tonight, folks.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'll leave with one note, which is my favorite silly voiceover moment, because I doubt this is going to come up again. When Esperanza first joins the picket line, and she talks about, like, the various things her family were doing to help. So, like, she's like, I was on the picket line and I had the baby with me. Ramon was taking care of things at home. Estelita, her girl, like, her daughter was keeping the other kids occupied. And then she goes, and Luis was in school. And then the camera pans. And then she goes, and Luis was in school. And then the camera pans to a bush right outside the picket line. And Luis, her son, is, like, sticking his head out and is absolutely not in school and watching the picket line.
That is I just want to say, like, one of the things I think is great about this movie is that it's funny. It's got
is
really
funny.
moments. I mean,
It does
really
have joyful
spans
moments. Yeah.
the range of human emotion. And I think there's also, and I think maybe this is what you were trying to get at earlier when we were talking about like kind of more contemporary movies that try to grapple with left-wing politics, but maybe actually get too dogmatic. I think something that, and I think there's been a lot of pushback against this too recently, but there's a lot of telling stories of the working class that are very sad. And
Yeah,
very
and like
one-note.
everything was awful and nobody had any fun ever.
Yes, and I think that there's been a lot of pushback against that. It's like, that's not fair to just like portray people's lives as like miserable. You know, there's been a lot of like, you know, you have to like show that like, you know, people's lives are complicated and they're different. And we're all making the best we can with what we have. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing about this film is it never pities its characters. It never looks down on them. And it doesn't, that's not to say that it glosses over hardship. It faces hardship head on, but it also has these beautiful moments of joy. It has a sense of humor. There are tons of scenes of them celebrating, having fun, dancing, drinking.
I love when the women make the picket line a celebratory thing and they're like singing and dancing in the middle.
Yeah. There's fun, there's joy, there's play mixed in with hardship and anger and conflict and sorrow. And I think that that's really critical for any story because that's what life is. Life is all of those things. It's never just one thing. And I think really good storytelling captures all of that. And I think that's part of what makes this movie so powerful is, you know, you're laughing, you're crying, you're furious right along with these characters.
I love it. Let's end there. That's beautiful. You can find your Silver Nitrate Witches on various online platforms at LJ Valenza and at Bellang303. Thanks so much to Fine Motor for the use of their song Highway Moon. You can check out more about the band at finemotormusic.com. Thanks for listening. Stay witchy and keep watching movies.